Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be discussing Njal's Saga, which is an Icelandic saga from the medieval period, and is a book that I chose to read in preparation for a short visit. I'm going for a few days to Iceland this summer on my way to a different destination, and I wanted to learn more about this little island of 300,000 people. And I thought, well, one of the best ways to do this is to read one of their famous sagas. And wow, I definitely learned quite a lot. And in the tradition that I seem to have fallen into in the last 6 months of reading things that are quite different from my experience. And I should say, I haven't fallen into it. I've intentionally chosen it, but I feel like I've fallen down a bit of a rabbit hole in choosing books that I'm in cultures that I'm not as familiar with. I've been finding just how different literature can be, just how different cultural traditions can seem and feel. And in a sense, I've not felt closer to those people. There's a lot of these happy clappy travel stories, travel essays these days. Oh, when I travel, I find out that everybody's really the same and we're all the same people. And I don't believe that. That's not what I experience when I travel. But I feel even more distant from some people when I read the text. And let me explain that a bit more. I understand that we're all humans and that we all have the same nature and that we're capable of great good and we're capable of great evil. So those generalities aside, it doesn't mean that I can understand how different cultures and people have lived. That even if I try to put myself inside their situations, to understand how they lived as a people and how they could have lived that way is hard for me sometimes. And I would say particularly so in this very difficult world of Iceland in the 1200s. So the conversion of Iceland happens around this time period to Christianity. And so you have a very tough, martial, eye for an eye, you could argue Old Testament, or there's links to paganism here, culture coming into contact with a religion that preaches love, peace, and forgiveness. It's going to take some time for that culture to adapt. And elements of the old culture are going to fight it. And over time, Iceland does become Christian in many ways. But in the beginning, in this early period, we have this contradiction. One of the parts of the saga has a woman who takes the bloody cloak of someone who's been killed. She puts it on someone and says, "In the name of Christ, you should take this revenge." And I remember reading that and I thought, lady, I'm not sure you understand how this Christ thing works in regards to revenge. But what you can see there is this period where two oceans meet, in a sense. There is this disturbance. So when you have Christianity meeting this older culture that preaches blood revenge, there's going to be misunderstandings or flawed understandings in the way that this woman demonstrated. The book is really broken into the saga, this saga that's come down to us. And the introduction talks about the fact that people in Iceland to this day can read this text and know who they're related to in the saga. Obviously, it doesn't cover everybody who lives in Iceland to this day, but people know, I am related to so-and-so in this text, which I find fascinating. I think there's even an app you have to use in Iceland if you want to date someone. You look in this app to find out if you're related to this person. So you make sure you're not dating, I don't know, a second cousin or something along the lines. They're all quite closely related, which you would understand if you live on an island of 300,000 people. And you really have three different main characters in this text. There's lots and lots of other characters, but you have Gunnar, you have Njal, and you have Kari. And each of them are leaders of their clans, you could say, in a certain way. People look up to them for advice. They have a lot of wealth. And each of them demonstrates both bravery and foolishness, as it might be, in certain ways, naivete. But I think what I found perhaps most edifying is the friendship between Gunnar and Njal, particularly in an escalating blood feud situation. So Gunnar has the great misfortune to marry poorly, and this woman is very vindictive, full of herself. She doesn't run a household well, and at one point she tries to get Gunnar and Njal involved in a feud by having people murdered. And if, you have to understand this world, murder is commonplace, and it's paid for. There's restitution. You pay for this to atone for the murder. And when the murder of a slave is less important than the murder of a free person, the murder when you've committed to a truce or to some other legal trial, this magnifies the punishment. But in any case, in each situation, let's say Gunnar's servant kills one of Njal's servants, they both meet, say, we're not going to let this come between us, and it just keeps escalating. So it goes from killing a servant to killing a free person, but they just say, we're going to be friends, we're not going to let this get the better of us. There are outside forces conspiring to draw us into things, and I think it underlines the quality of choice. When you're never backed into a corner. A lot of times people say, I was forced to do this, or I had no other solution. That people were watching, Njal and Gunnar were watching people get murdered, and they realized this isn't anything we committed to. We can't necessarily police all our people all the time, but we are going to keep staying friends. We're not going to let ourselves get drawn into this, and they're successful with doing so. Njal Saga, Njal is at the heart of it, but he ends up with a tragic fate, which I won't spoil for you. I'm going to let you read it just because it's such an enjoyable read. And we then have Kari as his avenger is the right word, but what ends up happening at the end of the text is something unexpected. I think if you've read the text up to this point, you're used to a certain cycle of violence. And the way that it's resolved is much more in line with the Christianity that has started to penetrate than the blood violence that we've started with. Something else that's quite interesting is the use of arbitration and, say, legal recourse. You have trials in which people accept self-judgment. So, for example, let's go back to Njal and Gunnar, they would just get together and they would have a conversation and say, okay, I think I should pay X amount in compensation for the loss of your slave. Do we agree on it? Effectively, the way we would say it in our modern parlance, let's shake on it. Okay, great. And that's it. You can even do this in a larger gathering. So each year in June is something called the All Thing, which was a gathering of all of the Godis, which you could say are sheriffs, marshals, overlords of different areas of Iceland. They all come together, and then they're thing men, they're men who are pledged to them in their Godi. And here you buy and sell, you make alliances, you negotiate for marriages, but you also have trials in which these larger disputes are settled. So and so stole from me. So and so injured my horse. So and so insulted me. That an insult is as good as a wound in this world. And much like Macbeth, in Macbeth you'll see a constant theme of manhood. Are you a real man? A real man would do this. The greatest insult in this time period related to manhood. And it would be used by women against men to goad them on to doing something. And it would be used by men against men. And this question of manhood is still something that's with us today, for better or for worse. I'm not trying to argue that it's something we should remove in our society, because men are men, women are women. We are not the same thing. We are different, and I know that makes me a horrible, hateful bigot, but that's just the reality of things. That in this society, insults and being goaded to defend your honor is really, really important, and that's something that Christianity erodes. The idea that your honor, your good name is the most important thing. This isn't to say that Christianity doesn't teach that you shouldn't defend your good name or defend your honor when it's required. But when it's not required, it's okay to let people say things about you that aren't true, because that is an imitation of Christ, in which he was silent before his detractors, before his accusers. That there's a reality that supersedes the reality that we can see around us. And that's the progress in Njal Saga, not just how the characters progress with each other, but how Iceland progresses from this blood revenge society to a society that has accepted Christianity, not necessarily with great enthusiasm, but over time they have, and that changes the way that they act and interact with each other. And I am definitely going to be asking about this book with the locals when I visit this summer, and just get their takes on it and try to understand how they understand this text, because for me it's a look into their world, but for them it was their world. It's the world of their ancestors. So I'm very curious and fascinated to talk to them about it. And if you'd like to get your own copy of the book, you can find a link to buy it in the description below, where you'll also find a copy of my Patreon, a link to my Patreon. Please click there if you'd like to support these sorts of reviews. Otherwise, please hit the like button, hit subscribe, forward this video to someone who you think would benefit from reading a book out of their comfort zone, out of their regular reading, an Icelandic saga. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And it might even prime you for a visit to Iceland. So until next time, enjoy your reading.